Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay, and let's get to the topic at hand. And the topic at hand today is coffee and chocolate. Is chocolate ever going to be like coffee? Is chocolate how coffee and chocolate are not the same? And that may sound pretty silly on the surface of it, but it turns out that it's not, in my opinion, for some very important reasons. And over the course of the next hour, I am going to share those reasons with you. So, regular watchers of episodes of Pod Save Chocolate will know that this is the home of thechocolatelife.com. It's live. You can go here. And for every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I create a post. And that post is going to provide an overview as well as links to resources. And that's last week's post. I need to go to this week's post. This is the post for this episode. And for every single one of these episodes, I'm going to provide a link or a set of links that you can go to resources about the topic. Right? And so, with that said, chocolate is not coffee. It should be obvious to everyone that chocolate is not coffee. But I want to talk about a very, very specific aspect of this that occurred to me yesterday morning. I was on YouTube and I was presented in my feed with a video from James Hoffman, who many people may know as a former world barista champion. And James is a very, very popular channel around coffee. And he was doing a review of a $1,500 manual coffee grinder. I believe the Weber Labs HG hand grinder 1. And he was talking about it. And it occurred to me after he asked the question, who is this piece of equipment for? Who is this grinder for? That a lot of things sort of coalesced in my mind over the course of the next hour. I was out taking a walk, and what came to me then, right, and how chocolate and coffee are not the same, is the way that coffee for many people has become a hobby, right? In ways that chocolate is not a hobby. So, how is that the case? So, if I am a coffee, if I drink coffee, I can get into coffee if I want to, relatively inexpensively. I can buy a $30 pod brewer. I can buy a very, very simple drip brewer. And, if I've got a pod brewer, I can buy a huge assortment of just sort of regular and specialty coffees and coffees that are flavored. I abhor flavored coffee, but many people like it, and that's of course a great thing. But I can get into coffee relatively inexpensively, and and by I can get a box of 12 or 20 pods, and they're very different. I mean, there are these Nespresso pod collections, and I can start experimenting with it. And if I want to, right, what I can do is I can sort of graduate up. So if I really like the idea of using a drip brewer, I can go from a $30 Mr. Coffee drip brewer to a much more expensive drip brewer. I could spend two, three, $400 or more on a drip brewer, maybe from Sage Breville, maybe from Technoform. I mean, there are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of different types of brewers. And I, as a budding coffee aficionado, not only have this huge range of choices that are open to me, but I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of videos on YouTube and channels dedicated to things like, there's one which is dedicated just to French press, brewing French presses, and rating and reviewing different French presses and different French press technique, and how to get the best from your French press, and all of this kind of stuff. Right? And if I want to, what I can do is I can then graduate from appreciating my coffee, I could go from just having a drip brewer, a mechanical drip brewer, to maybe what I'm going to do is I'm going to do my own pour overs. At which point, oh my gosh, am I using, what V60 technique am I using? And am I using a bypress or a zero bypass thing? And it's like, what kind of filter am I using, and what are the differences between all these filters? And so coffee becomes a sort of a hobby. Not a sort of a hobby, it is a hobby. And the more I get into coffee, I may say, oh, I want to learn to, instead of making my own drip coffee, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an espresso machine. And is it a hand espresso machine, or is it a mechanical espresso machine? And do I understand the difference between 9 bar pressure and lower pressure? And what kind of portafilter am I going to use? And, what's the shower screen look like? And then, you know, whose coffee? So I'm going to specialty roasters, and I have all this difference with respect to specialty roasters. And oh my gosh, am I going to grind my own coffee, right? Because we all know, or we should know, that freshly roasted and freshly ground coffee is going to provide a very, very different experience than coffee that has been roasted and sitting in a can or sitting in some sort of vacuum sealed container is going to provide you after weeks or months of that coffee sitting on a shelf or getting from the roaster to you. But the point being, there is an enormous amount of support around this hobby. I can start off spending very, very little, right, to engage in making coffee. But when I get to that point, there is this on ramp of lots of different ways to make coffee. And I get to experiment with the ways that I'm going to make coffee for myself. So I get to study how the way I change a particular so if I brew a particular coffee at this temperature using a V60 method as opposed to the same coffee at a different grind setting at a different temperature, how do I understand how that affects the clarity of the coffee that I'm making, or the flavor expression of the coffee that I'm making, right? And this is a deep well, right? And many people will say, why are you spending $2,000 on a hand grinder, to make coffee at home? Why are you spending $3,000 on an espresso machine to make espresso at home? What's the point? And the answer is, it's my hobby, or it is one of my hobbies. Now, I know people who've got 6 bicycles, right? They have different bicycles for different conditions, different gear ratios, off-road bikes, on-road bikes, racing bikes, regular bikes. Maybe they have an e-bike and accessories for any of them. And it's easy to spend $2, 3, 4, $5,000 on a bicycle, right? You know, it's not for me. It's not what I'm going to do. But I understand that once you get into the nuances of this, of whatever your hobby is, that it is literally a rabbit hole that you can dive down. And so um, that's why chocolate is not coffee. It's one of the reasons why chocolate is not coffee, is because when you think about it, there aren't a whole lot of options for actually making chocolate. How do I, right, as somebody who is interested in chocolate, right, want to explore converting cocoa beans into something I can consume at home, right? So, for example, one thing to consider is there's only one refiner, right? If I'm starting out making chocolate and I want to convert cocoa beans and refine them into something that might be like a European style chocolate bar, basically it's a small refiner. And this one is $300, right? I can use a bladed coffee grinder or spice grinder, but it will not refine the cocoa beans as finely as this one does, right? Um, and so when I think about diving into my hobby, right, of making chocolate from cocoa beans and exploring the differences, if I've got green beans, green cocoa beans, how I'm going to roast them. I mean, if I'm a coffee maker, right, or if I want to learn how to make coffee, this is a coffee roaster. It can be used to roast cocoa, and many people do roast cocoa beans in it, right? But there aren't a whole, I mean, other than something like this, I would put my coffee bean or my cocoa beans onto a baking sheet in the oven, right? There aren't a whole lot of options for me to explore, right? How does this roasting style as opposed to this roasting style affect the kind of chocolate that I'm making? I've got a bunch of different beans. I want to see how different levels of roast are going to affect the flavor expression of those beans in chocolate, right? And this is where chocolate is not coffee, right? Is that when it comes to exploring how to make chocolate, the range of options that are available to us is extremely limited. But if I want to make coffee, right? I mean, so for example, I mean, this is just a real quick, I did a quick search that says, what are some top channels about your dedicated channels to coffee on YouTube. And here are 60 of them. Many of them I've not heard before, I have to believe. But here is James Hoffman. I mean, this is old. He's got 1.9 million subscribers. He's currently well over 2 million subscribers. Morgan Eckroth, I mean, 1.3 million. And what they do is they talk about geek out into very, very small details about how grind size and particle size distribution and using laser particle size measurement systems and how a particular roast is going to be different. Or, if I've got, again, the Weber Labs, they have this new $360 French press. I mean, it looks absolutely gorgeous, but, right, it's a pretty crazy little device when you think about it. And that's just, and people might have multiple grinders. I mean, people are obsessed about how do I take my home coffee making experience and take it on the road with me. I mean, for these people, they have real deep hobbyist approaches to this, right? And you come back here and you go and look and go, man. I mean, I did create a list of some of these. Right? I started off. Here's James Hoffman. If you have never been to his channel, I mean, and you are at all interested in coffee, then this is a fabulous place to go start. James is a former world barista champion, located in London. Morgan is a US barista champion, right? We don't have an equivalent in chocolate. I mean, which is, interesting to consider. But, here it is, she's 1.4 million subscribers. Lance Hedrick is, again, he just the similar kind of bona fides, right? 240,000 subscribers, about the same number of videos as I've produced over the last couple of years, right? But, just a little geeky things like, if you're putting ground espresso beans into a portafilter, what kind of tool are you going to use to improve the distribution of those grounds in the portafilter so that when you compress them with the tamper, you're going to get a puck where there's no channeling, right? Or reduced levels of channeling. I mean, this is why chocolate is not coffee, right? There is no support for a hobbyist community in chocolate. So if you were to go and take a look, for example, so these are 60 top YouTube channels. I mean, I go to the same thing and I say, show me chocolate channels, right? They're only 15, which, okay, yeah, that 4-to-1, whatever that ratio is. But this one, I mean, so Ann Reardon, I mean, this is a great channel, but she mentions chocolate once in a while. This is not a channel about chocolate. It includes chocolate. Hercules Candy is about candy making. It's not about chocolate. Very, very different things. So there's nothing in here that tells you how I can go about doing any of this at home, right? So, nah, it's not the same. Here's a chocolate manufacturer. Chocolate Covered Katie. This is about baking and making things with chocolate. Again, baking, making things with chocolate, right? Pipe It, right? Baking, pastry chefs, things like that. We have to come down here, how to make chocolate at home. This is John Nancy's channel, right? So Chocolate Alchemy. And it's the closest, a total of 16,000 subscribers, probably more subscribers than anything other than the Craft Chocolate TV, which is Dylan Butterbought Manoa chocolate, in terms of how to go about and make chocolate. But even then, very little about what Dylan is talking about, Dylan and his guests are talking about in their channel, is really about how does the home hobbyist go and make these things and turn them into something? Or if they are, how come they haven't broken through, right? In the same way that the people who make coffee talk about it. I mean, and that's part of, so for you who are watching, that's one of the questions that I want to ask of you today, right? Um, why do you think, I mean, or just the basic proposition, do you think there's a connection, right, between all of this interest in chocolate, coffee as a home hobbyist and its growth of specialty coffee over the last 20 years, right? Makes coffee very, very different from what chocolate is. What is it that we have been trying to do in the world of craft chocolate and specialty chocolate that hasn't broken through, right? My contention, right, is that we've never paid any attention to the home hobbyist. We've never said to the people who would like to make chocolate at home, here are here are ways for you to geek out, and here are things that you can talk about, and here's a wide set of tools and methods and procedures that you can use. And the fact is, we just don't have a whole lot of equipment out there in the world, right? Which will enable people to go and play and experiment, right? With chocolate the way they do in coffee. Not quite sure if you're seeing the delays that I'm seeing, but maybe due to an internet connection. Quickly, just want to do a quick shout out to Elmer Pineda, who's connecting from Yohoa Chocolate in Honduras. Elmer, it's great to see you. Thanks for checking in today. Hey, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in Albuquerque at the Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Fest, which is going to be the first weekend in April. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And then um, hello from Caffeine Land. Hey, Mike from Encore Coffee Roasters Coffee Company in Kansas City, Missouri. Mike, good to check, to hear from you this morning. And if you're out there watching, go into the live chat wherever you are, whether it's the live chat on YouTube or the comments and LinkedIn or Facebook, and let me know where in the world you are connecting from. Don't need to know the channel, Facebook or YouTube, but where in the world, United States, elsewhere, let me know that you're watching today. And of course, if you've got a comment or a question that you'd like to make about the whole idea, right, of my proposition today, why is chocolate not coffee, not like coffee? How are they different? Can chocolate ever become like coffee? Will chocolate ever become like coffee? And what might be some of the things that are getting in the way of that? I mean, again, here's the post from the Chocolate Life today, some resources. If you're not familiar with James Hoffman, go and take a look at how many different grinder reviews does James have, and what is the range of grinders that he is reviewing, price and technology, right? Do you care about zero retention grinders? I mean, what is zero retention grinders? What conical burr sets? Flat burr sets? How do you season them? Are they blind? Are they 83 millimeter? Are they 65 millimeter? Just, the portafilters that you're using, the filter, whether it's paper or metal, how does that differ in what it is you're doing? If you want to geek out into that, right? James is one of the better resources on the internet for doing that. As is Morgan Eckroth, and as are Morgan Eckroth and Lance Hedrick. You can go into great detail about these things, right? There's a channel here, FrenchPressCoffee.com. There's a channel dedicated to nothing but French presses, right? And the different styles of French press. And, just for me, I forgot to bring it, but I was going to, is just in case anybody is interested. My general coffee habit is around, I use an AeroPress. I make coffee using an AeroPress. I've been using an AeroPress now for about 10 years. I don't grind my own coffee beans. I tend to run through bags fairly quickly. I don't pay as much attention to specialty coffee as I do to specialty chocolate. So I'm just really a dark, robust roast. I throw milk into it. That's the way I consume coffee in the morning. in my own day-to-day practice of making coffee, right? The whole idea of I am worried about, this style of gooseneck kettle over that style of gooseneck kettle. And am I going, there was a time in my life where I weighed out the coffee into my AeroPress, I weighed out the water into my AeroPress. In the end, I didn't see differences worth obsessing over, I suppose is the best way to describe it. And so I didn't continue. I do have a bladed grinder. I do buy whole bean coffee. I'm often gifted whole bean coffee, but I'm not really obsessing over paying as close attention to making coffee the way I pay attention to assessing the flavor of chocolate. So it's just not for me. But if you are, right, this is why coffee, in my opinion, right, is as big as it is. Specialty coffee is as big as it is. I can jump into coffee at whatever level of interest I have into making coffee, of converting ground coffee beans into roasted and ground coffee beans, or even if I want to green coffee beans, roasting them and converting them into coffee. And I get to play with grind size, and I get to play with the kind of filter, and I get to play with the kind of method, and I get to play with all of these dozens of variables around making coffee. And I can go as deep and deep and deep and deep as I want to. And I can spend hundreds and even thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars on coffee gear, right? And when it comes to chocolate, I can use a bladed coffee grinder and it's going to make a subpar product, right? All right. And if I want to make chocolate at home, I might use, this is probably the single most popular item for the hobbyist chocolate maker. It's also used by a bunch of professional chocolate makers because it's a small version of what they're going to grow up into it. I mean, if I do want to splurge and learn how to roast my own cocoa beans, this becomes an option, and I can go to Chocolate Alchemy and a bunch of other places and get small quantities of cocoa beans. So there are pathways where people can go and do this. But the amount of equipment that's available and the kind of support around the use of that equipment just basically doesn't exist. I mean, if I go to the Cocoa Town, this is the Cocoa Town YouTube channel, right? It has 2,000 subscribers. They've got 100 videos. But and there is an attempt to go and talk about it. And here's where I think the challenge is, and please, if you're watching this, let me know, the challenge, I mean, one of the compounding challenges, is that from the very beginning, if we go back all the way to Scharfenberger in the late 1990s, is the focus has been on bars, right? We have been focusing on converting cocoa beans into bars. It's called bean to bar chocolate. We call it tree to bar chocolate, right? And the focus is on bars. And what that means is not only do I have to understand all of the nuances of converting cocoa beans into chocolate, right? I now need to learn how to temper, right? And that's another skill, right? And not only that, but it's another skill that in most cases requires, um, it doesn't require, but in most cases, people opt for more technology. I buy a tempering machine, I buy something to do sous vide, I'm buying something to make silk, right? In order to do, I mean, it requires an enormous amount of skill to get there, right? And it's hard, and that's not coffee, right? Because coffee is immediate. I can go and do two different grinds of the same coffee bean and make two V60 pour overs and compare them side by side directly, right? And I can do that inside of 10 minutes, right? I can't do that with chocolate. I mean, there's something about the way we're talking about chocolate, right, which says, why am I talking about packaging essentials? Well, part of it is that the people at Cocoa Town have a business reason for doing this. They're selling machines for people to make chocolate. I mean, they make a refiner that is competitive with this one. I don't mean to point out this particular one as opposed to the ones from Cocoa Town, right? Right, and but the number of options and the price associated with those options is very limited. So for me, if I'm looking at, if I'm here and I'm looking at a review of coffee grinders, right? The difference between coffee grinder A and coffee grinder B, right? Maybe I got 5 coffee grinders in the same price range. They're still grinding a given amount of coffee in roughly the same amount of time, right? It's not that I've got a small grinder and now I'm buying a bigger grinder, which will grind a lot more coffee, right? No, if I'm focused on coffee, especially if I have a smaller press, maybe I have a flare lever espresso machine, as opposed to a conventional, you know, a more conventional espresso machine, which has got a boiler and is pressurized, right? Um, then what I'm interested in is how long does it take me to grind somewhere between 50 and 20 grams of cocoa beans, right? That's what I'm interested in. How long? What is the distribution, the particle size distribution of those grounds? How even is it? When it comes out of the grinder, right? How much retention is there? Which is how much, if I put 20 grams in, do I get 20 grams out? If I put 20 grams in and I get 18 grams out, that's a high retention grinder. So I need to worry about that. When am I dosing? Am I grinding directly into a portafilter? Am I grinding into something else? So there's this concept called workflow. Is there popcorning of the beans? What kind of measuring cup am I using? Do I have to miss the beans? I mean, what's the difference in all of those things? I mean, it is really, really fabulous. And so there's an enormous amount of experimentation around a single device. I can have one grinder, right? And I can play around with all these differences in order to get what I like best, or to understand the differences between how misting doesn't affect things, or if I go through with a distribution tool after the fact, or does the grinder have some sort of distribution tool built into the grinder? I mean, these are all things, but they don't affect the capacity of the grinder, right? It's still doing the same 15 to 20 grams in a minute, more or less, somewhere in that range. I don't need to go, oh, here is a here is a refiner that will do 8 pounds of chocolate at a time. And oh, here is a refiner that does 10 pounds of chocolate at a time. Oh, and this refiner's got plastic parts and this one's got stainless steel parts, right? And the next step up is from a 10-pound to a 15-pound grinder, and then from a 15-pound to a 20-pound grinder. That's that. There's no ability to experiment with a grinder of a specific size and understand how changes to workflow, right? And perhaps settings. Oh, what happens if I run this at 30 RPM for 4 hours? I mean, so in the coffee world, if I have a variable RPM grinder, what I may do is I may find that depending upon the RPM, the particle size distribution will change, where the center of the distribution is, right? I may find that it's not only where the center is, but how narrow the distribution is. That's one thing. And what's the difference between, if I've got a flat burr set or a conical burr set, it's like, how are those differences going to make difference if I have a grinder and I can switch between a conical burr set? I mean, I heard there's one called Zervo, I think it's a Z1, which I heard about recently. I mean, it's one grinder, but you can change the diameter of the burr set. You can change the kind of burrs that you're using. Go from conical to flat in the same grinder. I mean, that's amazing, right? How do I do that in the world of chocolate, right? If I want to make chocolate, I can't go from beans to something that I can consume in a matter of minutes. I don't have the kind of individual control for what the machine does, for the innards of the machine. How do I go and change this? For example, if I had, this refiner, could I go from this kind of granite to that kind of granite? Could I go from this kind of groove to that kind of groove? Could I go from granite to Teflon? I mean, and what are the differences between all of those things, right? In terms of the effect that they have on the finished product, right? And I'm going to suggest, right, that rather than focusing on 2 ingredient chocolate, or rather than focusing on single origin chocolate, Or rather than focusing on all of these different aspects of finished chocolate bars, that perhaps the way forward is to focus on the experience of making, of transforming cocoa beans into something that can be consumed, right? And maybe it's chocolate bars and maybe it's not, right? But that if we were to focus on that experience and to give the home hobbyist, the person at home who is interested in specialty coffee, right, and interested in specialty cocoa and specialty chocolate, to give them the range of options from relatively inexpensive and mechanical, just I just put water in it and I put my cocoa beans in it or my coffee beans in it and I press a button and then I walk away for 10 minutes and I have a pot of coffee, right? So at some level, can I do that? Well, and the answer to the question is there is work in that direction. I mean, there is work in that direction. And that is from a company called Cocoa Terra, right? They've been focusing on making a home appliance chocolate maker, right? This is a little mini ball mill, right? It'll handle somewhere between like 250, 350, and 500 grams of nibs at a time. It makes a chocolate bar, so there's a built-in tempering machine, or that is the claim, right? I'm doing this. I'm showing here because this sort of represents one way of engaging with, right, the home hobbyist, which is different from the existing chocolate refiner. There are a couple of differences. Number one is this works relatively small, like less than 500 grams at a time, whereas the Premier is going to be 8 pounds to 10 pounds. There's a minimum of probably 2.5, it's like a little over a kilo or more in there. So it's a very, very different experience. This is a ball mill, but that would be interesting. This is a ball mill. How is a ball mill? How's the texture of a ball mill? How does it change from that of a refiner? With a refiner, I can change the length of the time. I can change the temperature. I could change the airflow, so I can affect the flavor development differently by playing with those variables. I don't know what the variables are in this. As a matter of fact, just so you know, nobody knows. Nobody knows what the variables are in here. I had a chance after posting this yesterday. I said, let's go and do a little bit of research on the Cocoa Terra machine. And it turns out that they're now taking pre-orders for batch 5 of this machine, right? And they're expecting to ship these in the fall of 2024. It's important to know that the pre-orders for batch 1, which were taken way back in 2021, I believe, those orders have not yet shipped, right? So there are no production machines being used anywhere in the world, right? And there was some notification last year, so late in 2023, that batch 1 was going to ship in early 2024. And so those haven't shipped yet. So batch 1 has not shipped yet. And there have been multiple promises over a long period of time as to when batch 1 will ship. So if you are interested in this device, I can understand. I'm curious about this device, right? But my recommendation would be not to pre-order. Do not spend your money, right? Even though you're looking to save $400, right? If you order now, right? You have no idea what you're buying. The delivery for this thing is at least 2 years late, if not more than that, right? And my counsel would be wait until they start shipping production units. So the first batch, the batch 1 production units, the current delivery time is July of this year. So make yourself a note to come back here and find out if they're actually shipping these units. And if they are, wait to see if there are any independent reviews of them. Right now, there are no independent reviews. There's no information about this. There's been no public demonstrations of this that I am aware of, right? So we need to be very, very careful about that. Cool idea. It's $800. right? So this is going to appeal to only a very small group of specialty chocolate aficionados who are interested in doing this. And in fact, it may be more, I could see using this as a way to very, very quickly develop some prototypes. So I'm looking at evaluating different roast levels of the same beans. And so I might run them into here. I would know that putting them in a refiner like a melanger is going to make a different chocolate, but at least I would have a tool which would very quickly, within an hour or two, for $800, right, or $1,200. I mean, if I was in the business, having this would be, I think, a potential game changer for me as a chocolate maker. As a home hobbyist, I'm not so sure because it produces one format of thing. It's a ring mold, and it only produces a relatively small amount of chocolate. So it's really, really important to number one, understand where this is, what the limitations are, and number one is nobody's seen one of these things actually work outside of the development team. Um, and so be very careful. Again, my counsel is wait until they ship in July. If they don't ship in July, they will have the first batch doesn't ship in July, they will have missed still yet another delivery date, right? And we don't really have anything other than the developers talking about it to understand what the capabilities and limitations of the machine are. I applaud the idea. I mean, I got to say, I love the idea of this machine. If because it represents another avenue in. So it could say, yes, I could take the same cocoa bean with two different as a home chocolate maker. I could take two different cocoa beans, the same cocoa nibs at different roast levels, and very quickly, within an hour each or so, right, be able to evaluate what the differences are between the two roasts. And that would be cool, right? Maybe if I have control over temperature and other aspects of it, I could start experimenting with how temperature changes it, how airflow changes it, how other aspects of the technical parameters that I have under my control will affect the flavor of chocolate. We're getting there. We're getting there. This is a really, really interesting idea. I would love to see it succeed. I would love to get one physically in my hands and play with a bunch of different nibs and understand to be able to tell you what it's like. Unfortunately, we can't yet. But I think this is a really important step forward. But how do we do this for a fraction of this cost? I mean, is there another kind of refiner that we can make, right? That will, I would love to see a KitchenAid attachment. I've got a kitchen or some other stand mixer with that. Can I use the motor on a stand mixer, right? Can I use the motor on a Cuisinart? What can I do to make it, possible for somebody to experiment with this in a very in a different way, so that I, as a home hobbyist chocolate maker, can have control over the kinds of parameters, right, that I want to use to be able to create something different, to be able to experiment, to give me the ability to play, right, the way I can if I'm interested in coffee, right? A really, 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 I think, important idea here. I want to do a quick, there's a comment from Mike at Encore Coffee. Comparing the two, I find information on chocolate very difficult to find and harder to deep dive. For example, trying to understand the variables that impact flavor is limited. Mike, I agree with you. I agree with you. And I have to admit that after yesterday's epiphany, I'm a part of the problem, right? I haven't focused on this, right? I think there is an opportunity to take all of the work that has been done over the course of the last 20 years. A lot of it has been done by John Nancy, the Chocolate Alchemy. I mean, he has focused somewhat, right, he has focused to some extent on many of these issues, right? But it hasn't broken through in the same way that it has broken through in coffee. And I think, right, that this represents a really, really interesting opportunity. So you're out there watching, you're the home hobbyist. What I'd like to know is, What frustrates you, right? What would you like to know, right? Where are your price points when it comes to converting cocoa beans into a finished chocolate products? What are your pain points? What is it easy to understand? What is it hard to understand? Where do you want to take this? And that's what you're doing as a home hobbyist, right? If you're an equipment maker, right? How do we go about making equipment that will help drive this? I mean, that will help drive. So, for example, um, the coffee grinders are dry grinders, right? But there are ways to make a wet grinder, right? So would it be possible to actually create a grinder, so a through feed grinder, right? Um, which doesn't cost 5,000 euros or 10,000 euros. Could I create something and I could understand with different burr sets? Maybe I have a stainless steel burr set, maybe I have a granite burr set. I mean, that'd be cool, right? In order to do it, what are the things that we can do, right, to make it easier for someone to get the very, very tactile sensibility which is associated with coffee making and the control over the variables, right, that are there. So it's not just one production pathway. There's not just one workflow. There's I can this is what I think is really, really um, important, and it is the major difference between chocolate, specialty chocolate, and specialty coffee. Now, specialty chocolate represents less than 1% of the global chocolate market. It represents a higher percentage than that. And when we think about the cocoa bean market, but when it comes to finished chocolate market, we're very, very tiny in terms of the single origin, two ingredient, higher end, not industrial mass market chocolate. Um, right. But how do we go about and but specialty coffee is enormous. And I can get specialty coffee in any format. I can get specialty coffee in espresso pods. I can get specialty coffee in K cups. I can get specialty coffee in roasted beans. I can get specialty coffee in ground beans. I can go to my local grocery store, whether it's Kroger slash Fry's or Safeway or any raw hold, Royal Ahold. So Stop and Shop. I can go to any one of those places and I can find not just mass market coffee made from generic robusta beans grown from around the world, roasted months ago, and I drink it because it's what I've always drunk, and I'm going to put it in my $30 Mr. Coffee, and I'm just going to that's because that's the way I drink coffee, right? But the accessibility of all these different kinds of coffee in all these different formats, right? In ways that allow me to very gradually, if I get interested in the idea, go from something as simple as put a pod into a machine, press a button. All I have to do is decide how big I want it to be. Is it a 4 ounce pour, or a 10 ounce pour, or a 12 ounce pour? That's all I need to do, right? Um, and then I can go from one machine to another. I mean, the range of capabilities just within the Nespresso environment is ridiculous. And I can spend not very much money to a lot of money on these machines, right? And it's still just a press and play environment. I can buy a bean to cup espresso machine, like the kind I can find in many specialty coffee shops, where I fill a hopper with beans and I scroll through a touch screen and go and it will make it for me. I mean, I spend a lot more money for that, obviously, but I've got more control over what it is that I'm doing, and I have arguably, well, no, I've inarguably a very different cup of coffee, right, and different types of cups of coffee. Arguably, is it much better, or arguably, could it be much better if I spent more money, right, and paid more attention? The answer is absolutely yes. I mean, you can't take a $300 all-in-one bean to cut machine and think you're going to get the same results as if you spend $1,000 on a grinder, right, and you spend $4,000 or on an espresso machine, or even if you're spending a couple of hundred on a lever machine. So it's a fundamental different expectation in terms of what's going on. And I've said it several times, and I'm going to say it again, that I think this is what we're missing. when it comes to taking chocolate out of the doldrums. It hasn't been growing at the same rate relative to the rest of the chocolate market for the last 5 years or more, right? Why is that? Right? Why is that, in my opinion? Why haven't we grown at the same rate? I'm going to push in because I can, yay. Um, and that is because number one is we're focused on chocolate bars. We're focused on producing a finished, tempered bar of European style chocolate. And I don't know why. I have no understanding of why that's the focus of what we're doing. Right? I have to have, I have to have a level of understanding of a technical level of understanding and proficiency, right, which is relatively high on a wide range of topics in order to be able to produce a reasonable quality bar, right? And so, yeah, maybe I may get the refining right, but I get the tempering wrong, right? Will and maybe I struggle and tempering, and I struggle and tempering and struggle and tempering. Why should that be the limiting factor on whether I consider myself to be successful? And the answer to the question is it shouldn't. It should not be the limiting factor, right? In terms of experimentation, right? We have a timing problem. I can go take whole coffee beans, spend a minute in the grinding and maybe a couple of minutes either side. I got to pull out my scale. I put my measuring cup on the scale. I weigh out exactly 17 and a half, right? Or however many grams of coffee beans I need for the particular style of whatever. So more for a V60 as opposed to an espresso. I now say, okay, what is my grind setting? How coarse is my grind setting going to be if I have a variable RPM machine, right? Or what kind of burrs do I have? And how does that affect everything? So I've got some decisions that I need to make, right? They're creative decisions. And I think this is the important part of it. They're creative decisions, right? In this. And I get to decide, right, over time, which set of decisions makes coffee that I prefer, right? But the time from starting off with coffee beans, right, and pouring them into a measuring cup until the time I have finished coffee, again, depending upon the brewing method. So if I have something like the Tricolate, right, or other zero bypass makers, it could be 10 or 12 minutes at the most, right, for everything to happen. If I've got an AeroPress, from the time I put the coffee in the AeroPress until the time I can start drinking it, might be 3 or 4. I mean, it's very, very different. From the time I from the time I say, you know what, I want to take some cocoa nibs and turn it into chocolate, you've got 6 hours, 8 hours overnight, right, before I do it. And I need to make a lot more than 1 cup, right? I need to make pounds of it, right? And so if I want to do 8 or 10 or 12 experiments, I end up with what, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 pounds of chocolate, when really all I want is to taste it, right? And to understand how playing with these variables make a huge difference. Now, right, that's a big ask, right? I understand, right? Really is. And one question is, why hasn't anybody done this? And the answer to the question is manufacturers aren't going to make much money, right, making this. If I make something that will allow somebody to make 50 grams of chocolate at a time, I mean, I've got, here's one approach to making relatively small amounts of chocolate at a time, right? um, and it's this machine, and it maybe it makes 250 grams in an hour or so, right? um, that's getting to a point where this is almost doable. But at $1,200 as the lowest cost entry point in doing this, I understand it says $800, but they're using your money now and shipping you something in 4 to 8 months or 2 to 3 years later. So you're financing the production of the machine. So, and you don't know, number one, what it will do, if it will do what is promised, if it will, how it will do a promise, or if it will ever be delivered, right? So you are taking that risk when you do these things. Now, because this is not because this is not part of the Indiegogo campaign or a Kickstarter campaign, you could ask them for a refund, or you can go to your credit card and ask them for a refund if you don't want to get it. I mean, if you did this as part of the original Indiegogo campaign, you have no recourse. I mean, you have to wait until or if they ever deliver this product. Again, I love the idea of this product, right? I would love for it to be successful because I think it represents one way to start working towards this. But what I want to suggest to everyone who is out there, who is thinking about this, is how do we engage with a home hobbyist chocolate maker? How do we engage with them in a way that makes it possible, easy, possible for them to start off with making chocolate at home, right? In a form and size and amount, right? That can be easily consumed, right? In a form and in an amount that enables them to be able to A/B compare, right? How the creative decisions that they make have an impact on the flavor of what it is that they're making. And how do we do that on relatively low cost equipment, right? That doesn't require them to make kilos at a time, right? In order to be able to go through this. And we can get to something which is edible relatively quickly, right? Um, interesting, interesting, I think, move forward. And I think it is exactly the kind of development effort which is going to be required. So hardware development effort. And Mike, as you point out, right, also very important, um, educational infrastructure effort. So how do we go about essentially doing what John Fancy did with Chocolate Alchemy starting back in 2004 in terms of pioneering a specific production pathway? So John is probably one of the single most important people in the craft chocolate movement, because what he did is he figured out a way for people to make chocolate relatively inexpensively with basically home kitchen appliances, right? Right? We still don't have a really good way to crack and winnow cocoa beans, right? So into nibs, it's either relatively expensive or it's really messy. So there's some innovation there, and I think this is where the innovation needs to happen. You know, if I have a cocoa bean roaster or a coffee bean roaster, I mean, other than a little Beemore, most coffee roasters do have chaff collectors. So if there's a little bit of shell, paper shell, which comes off the coffee bean during roasting, then there's a way to collect that. Number one, you want to keep it from burning because roasting coffee is relatively high temperature. Um, all sorts of things that need to be done. The challenge becomes, how do we go about doing that? So if I want to get into roasting, I want to be able to do that. If I want to start off with whole beans, I can start off with whole beans. If I want to start from ground, I can start from ground. If I want to start from nibs, I can start from nibs. How do I go about doing that, right? What does that infrastructure look like, right? And how do we move forward in order to be able to get the kinds of equipment? What kind of thinking is required to say, how do we go about providing equipment to people which will give them this kind of room for experimentation? And I think most importantly, right, is, well, I don't know that it's most importantly, but I think that one of the predicate actions that needs to happen here is we need to consider how we do this for hot chocolate rather than how do we do this for chocolate bars, right? How do we make it possible for somebody to explore the world of flavors which is associated with chocolate, right? In beverage form, right? So going back to pre-industrial revolution ways of making chocolate, which is what using a melange is, we're going back to especially two ingredient. That's pre-industrial revolution methodologies and thinking about how to make chocolate. But for most of its history, chocolate was a beverage. And so let's go, in order to move forward, I think we might have to go back even further, right? That by giving people the ability to experiment quickly around how changes in the creative decisions that they make have an effect on the finished cup of hot chocolate, right? I think might be the way forward when it comes to moving the entire craft slash specialty chocolate movement forward. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments here, whether you're watching Facebook, whether you're on LinkedIn, whether on YouTube, go into the comments, let me know what you think. You can also, right, become a member of the Chocolate Life. So I want to say that every episode of Pod Save Chocolate is in fact sponsored by the members of thechocolatelife.com. You can go there, click this green button. Mine says account because I'm logged in. It'll say join, become a member, support. If you're watching on YouTube, give the video a thumbs up, give it a like, go and subscribe to the channel, right? Click on the notification bell and so that you get notified of future videos. I do Pod Safe Chocolate episodes twice a week, except when I'm traveling. And let's, most importantly, continue this conversation. What do you think? Do you think that there's a way, that this whole idea, right, that, yeah, we know that chocolate is not coffee, but what will it take, right, to be able to break through, right? How do we create a very, very large scale home hobbyist market, right? Or community, better community, right? In which they have the tools and the information and the personalities, maybe not me, it doesn't have to be me, but I realize that I'm just as guilty as this, as everybody else is, right? I have missed this entire aspect of what makes specialty coffee special, right? For over a decade, right? I've missed it for a long, long time. And so how do we go about doing that? Are you interested in helping? Do you have some ideas? Let me know. If you are a member of the Chocolate Life, on every single one of these episodes, you are a member. So if you are a member, you can engage in the member discussion. If you're not a member, you can't engage in the discussion, but you can join free. Just click on this little button down here. It'll say join. I'm logged in, so it'll say join. You can become a part of the discussion. You can help me make this work. And by helping me make this work, I'm helping you make it work as well. That little lag actually is when I'm skipping back and forth between screens. Interesting. So my cursor focus moves from one screen to another, and there's a lag for some reason. I'm not certain why that is. But anyway, let's close out today quick. Another challenge is most coffee hobbyists start with roasted coffee. In the chocolate world, there's very limited choice of pre-roasted nibs cacao. Yes, yes, yes. That is one of the challenges that needs to be overcome. So there is a supplies infrastructure. You know, what I would need to do is I would need to be able to say, here is the same bean with a light roast, a medium roast, and a dark roast, right? In order for me to be able to understand what the differences are if I converted them into chocolate. So yeah, there is an infrastructure which needs to be put in place from an ingredients perspective, because there are some people who don't want to start from whole beans. That learning how to roast whole beans is a real challenge, and to understand how to bring out the most. So, Mike, I completely agree with you, that that's necessary. That would be necessary to put into place. Um, but again, would just doing the ingredients help solve this problem? No, I think there needs to be a simultaneously move forward to an entirely new suite of tools, right, which provide entirely new production pathways based on a very different set of predicates, right? And the two predicates are speed. How do we get something? How do we enable somebody to get to a finished product that can be consumed quickly, right? Ideally in well under an hour, if not much, much faster. How do we go about doing that, right? And number two is, how do we, so I that predicate. And then why are we focused on bars? Why are we focused on solid tempered chocolate as the format for doing this, right? So if we change one of the predicates, well, drinking chocolate, right? Let's consume it as beverage form rather than bar form, right? Is that the key that unlocks this whole thing? If I have a set of equipment which is based upon an entirely different output, then what can we do? Could I make a small little grinder that did that? The answer is absolutely yes. Could I make a hand grinder? Absolutely yes. There exists one today, a Corona grain mill. It's not great, but it can be used. Are there ways to, and it's cheap, it's $40. right? I can create liquor. I mean, there are ways to do it now, but nobody's focused on it, right? And I think that it's important that that happened. And that's the journey. That's the question. That's the ask. Number one, do you think this is interesting? Number two is, do you think it could be fun? And remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong, right? Is it interesting? Is it fun? Could it be of value? Could it be of interest? Could it be as transformative to the world of cocoa and chocolate as the craft chocolate industry itself has been over the course of the last 25 years or so? And that's the question I'm going to leave with all of you today, right? Is interested in joining me? I mean, this is something that I am going to be focused on quite a bit over the course of the next year or, well, over the rest of my career. I want to make this happen. And if you want to come along and join me, please come along and join me. I was interested in all of the input and all the help that every single one of you can provide me in doing this because, you know, I think it has the potential to be transformative and it has the potential to be a lot of fun. And with that, I'm done for today's topic. But before we go, I want to say that this coming Tuesday, the next episode of Pod Save Chocolate, which is Tuesday, the 5th of March, because, hey, everybody, today is the 5th of March, the 1st of March. So happy leap year day yesterday to everyone. Is this coming Tuesday, I'm going to be having as my guest the organizer, Dean Strober, of the Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Fest. We're going to be talking about the festival itself, the background. We're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that's going on this year, who you can expect to be there from the chocolate and coffee side, all of those kinds of things. So please join me this coming Tuesday, where we're going to have a conversation with Dean Strober about the Southwest Chocolate and Coffee Fest. I'm going to be there. I'm giving 4 pairing classes, 2 on Saturday, 2 on Sunday. I'm going to be moderating a panel. And then I'm also going to be one of the judges for the baking competition. If you're going to be there in Albuquerque, let me know. Let's plan to get together. I will publish a get together for after one of the classes so that everybody can get there. We can just say hello and see what is this going on. See each other in person, right? Rather than virtually. It'll be a great thing. But until this coming Tuesday, everybody, listen, have a great, great, great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you all in a future episode of Pod Safe Chocolate. Until then, everybody, ciao.